We're going to go on a little journey in this video. I'm trying to learn how to use this CNC machine to its fullest potential, in my fullest potential. So I always take advantage of the holidays and birthdays and whatnot to sort of try to do something new and push some learning on me. And so I decided I wanted to learn a little bit more about 3D carving, especially two-sided 3D carving, which I can do now with my newest version of Aspire, and that machine. So this video is going to chronicle that. Where's the line when, if you use one of those machines, it's no longer handmade? That's the question I have, and I would love to have that discussion happen below. If I take a piece of wood and I cut it and I plane it and I mill it and do all this stuff and then put it in the CNC machine, does all that work get negated to where it's no longer handmade? Well, check it out. We're all just kind of here to learn, right? Ideally, I want to be able to use the newest version of Aspire to its fullest potential and do 3D carving on two sides of the same piece of wood. I started simple by modeling an iPhone for my 15-year-old niece Hillary. I thought I would just get the dimensions offline and make a very simple shape, some very mild cuts, and give her something that she could hold instead of the real thing to give it a break every once in a while. And I used this piece of wood, which is a piece of reclaimed decking furniture, I believe it to be teak, that I had gotten from her father. So it was a pretty simple model, really too simple for what I'm trying to do, but it was a good place to start. I put my wood in, I set up that little fence to line it up and find my zero, and just started carving. First I did a rough cut with a 1/4-inch end mill, and then I switched to an 1/8 ball nose end mill to do the detail work. I then also used a V-bit to carve in some initials. I left some tabs that I could just cut with a razor blade, and I was able to pop that piece of wood right out. This wood was a little too light and too splintery for this. I tried doing some repairs on it. There was a spot that chipped and sanded it up, and it came out okay. The file worked properly and it all looked good, but it was a little too light and a little too thin. I wasn't happy with it. I thought she needed a more substantial piece of wood that would make it feel more like an iPhone. I finished it anyways. And then I dug into my pile of wood I got from my friend Dylan, whose father was a guitar maker, and he gave me a bunch of these little just pieces of exotic wood. So I don't even know what this is, Wengi or something, I'm not really sure, but it was just a little denser and firmer, and I had this piece that was pretty much the perfect size. And I didn't carve the initials in this time because I didn't like the way they looked, but this denser wood came out a lot better looking. It feels more like an iPhone. There was no splintering. It was definitely worth doing again. You can see the difference here. Now it's time to move on to full two-sided 3D carving, and I decided to make a whale, of course. I found a very simple vector, just that outline drawing that you can see there online, and just copied that, and I decided to try and make that three-dimensional. It wasn't too hard to blow up the one side. Basically what I just did is created it all on one side and then mirrored it to the other. What I did have trouble figuring out how to do was to get tabs in there so it wouldn't just fall through and get it centered in the block of wood. As you can see, I was having a little bit of trouble there. And I decided to use some of the boat wood that I got from Levi from the Ernestina. Since it's a whale, I thought I might as well get a piece of wood that might have actually, seen a whale someday. I began to prepare the wood, and it was right about here that I realized I don't have to do it this way. I have bigger tools to handle the job, so I squared it all up with some electric tools instead. Now this is where my inexperience with CNC really starts to show, and I start to make some mistakes, so pay attention. Maybe I'll save you some trouble in the future. First I created that little fence, and I used a little piece of two-sided tape to stick that in there, because I wasn't quite sure if I was going to have room to screw it down yet. I wanted to at least start cutting it before I popped any screws in to make sure they weren't going to get hit by the router blade. So I do first a rough pass where I use the 1/4-inch end mill to get it all roughed into shape, as you can see here. And now I know where I can put my screws, and I'm ready to do my final pass, which I use an 1/8-inch ball nose bit for, which then goes and does all the final detail and shapes. I want to point out here that I'm not going to fully explain all of the problem solving that I had to figure out in the software, because there are so many better tutorials on the Vectrix YouTube channel and other YouTube channels where they really explain how to use the software better. I'm trying to just sort of show the real world side of it. I'm not quite qualified to do that type of talking yet. I just realized now that this block was supposed to be 3.5 inches, not 3 inches. And I thought it was interesting how it was cutting off here because it didn't on the model, but that's okay. The only thing it affected was my tab. The whole sculpture still fit inside. This is a trick that I learned from Vector, because if you drill those 3 holes into your block and then you drill them again into the wasteboard in reverse, you can flip the wood upside down and it will perfectly line it up. So I've got that down, but here you'll see in a second where I obviously didn't have my tabs right on my whale. And as I'm starting to do the final cut on the second side, there it goes, it breaks free, and now I'm just cutting air. But I don't know this, of course, because I'm not watching. I just walked over and realized that this is the first side, and then it fell. The tabs I made weren't big enough to hold it in place, and it just completely fell. So I've been cutting air for the past 10 minutes. So I tried again. I made bigger tabs, and you can see that one was kind of useless, and those actually kind of worked. But then what I also did is I just sort of fudged my depth to just give myself a little bit of wood here that I could then cut out on the bandsaw and play it safe, because I have to sand the tabs in anyways. I might as well sand all that in. But what I'm thinking is, what I just did is cheat, and I figured out a solution by using hand tools, but I didn't actually figure out how to use the software properly yet, which bothered me. But I moved on to the good wood anyways, thinking I might have it figured out by the time I was ready to do that. So this is some really beautiful red mahogany that's reclaimed also from the Ernestina. Thanks again, Levi. And I wanted to make the whales out of this. And right about here is where I start thinking how people say using a CNC isn't real woodworking. I don't get it. I suppose if I were making everything out of plywood, which I think some people think the CNC is, I could understand that. But as you can see here, and what I'm trying to show in this video is that it's just another tool in the shop, man. And CNC is absolutely real woodworking, and it takes a real woodworker to use it. Actually, maybe even like a real woodworker and beyond. I switched to hot glue this time to see how that would work as I glued my block in, and started trying out my file. Now remember, I haven't fixed it yet. The first side came out great, and you'll notice I used the hot glue on my work instead of on my bench, so that way I could scrape it off the work and not have it messing up the level of my table. There's my upside down dowel trick we were talking about, a little bit of hot glue to keep it in place, and some wood kind of pushed around it to hold it still, and now it's time to cut out the second side. Moment of truth. Well, once again, my tabs weren't strong enough, and it just broke, so I need to make a much larger tab, or find some way of supporting it, which doesn't really work. This 3D carving stuff is tricky. This side looks beautiful though. Maybe we'll just make it a 2D thing and hang it on the wall. This is where I must give huge props to Todd Bailey of Design and Make. Go check out TB Makes and Design and Make on YouTube and elsewhere on the web, and he's my go-to guy to call to help me figure out these problems. Todd explained to me that my tabs weren't long enough. I needed to create an extra outside vector around the whale to really isolate the area that I was going to cut, and then make sure my tabs went beyond that, so they didn't just get cut out and end up getting rounded over in the profile. Since the tabs were getting added on, they were becoming part of the profile, and I was actually cutting my tabs out. I fixed that, tried again, and my depth was just a little bit off. This looks good. There's just a very thin layer of wood here. I'm going to bandsaw that right out. I was off. Oh man, I was off. Because my guess is that I must have screwed up these holes when I was going back in and editing the file. I bet I didn't line those up right. Son of a monkey. God. Now I'm determined, so what I did this time was I took my block and instead of squaring it all up on my traditional power tools, I strapped it right down to my table, used my square to set my depth of my router bit to make sure I had the depth exactly the same as the file, and then I just manually drove the router bit back and forth to square off my wood cube to the table to the router, so now I know my depth is going to be perfect. I fixed my dowel marking holes and I went through and made a whale. It looks so cool in there, I almost don't want to take it out. Finally, I Figured it out. I just had a couple little tabs to snip off on the bandsaw, which was easy, and then I sanded them off and finished them off with a little hand sanding and some beeswax mixed with linseed oil, and that's some local beeswax, so I think that's kind of cool. I intended to make 2 whales, one for my wife and one for her parents, my in-laws, and I ended up having a few extras that I did some fun stuff with, some of the failures, because they're still cool. And again, go to Vectric's website and check out their YouTube channel for some more information about how to use the software and some of the tips and tricks about it. Or ask me questions and I'll do my best to answer. I'm just not qualified to make like actual software tutorial videos yet. But I'm learning how to do it, and if a monkey like me can do it, so can you. Well, I sure learned a lot. I hope you did too, or at least enjoyed watching this. If you did, you can like, share, and subscribe. I'd appreciate it. You can also support me on Patreon at patreon.com/TimSway. And if you would like to make a 3D whale, ask someone else. I'm done. Thanks a lot and be good.